Welcome back. So, Lola and I have been together for more than 20 years, and we are now more than a decade removed from a marriage crisis so serious that divorce paperwork was actually filed. So, when I tell you that your wife losing desire or your husband losing desire for you does not automatically mean your marriage is finished. I'm not talking theory. At one point, some of what I thought was love and effort was landing on the other side as neediness, clinginess, and while I was focused on what she was not giving me, attraction was dying underneath the marriage. Now, years later, we worked with a client whose relationship had quietly turned into what we can consider to be homebodies, right? And the bigger problem was not the missing romance. It was what had happened to identity while depending on a husband or a wife for emotional security. Research backs up why this gets even more dangerous. You see, in a study of about 1,000 plus married couples, greater sexual desire discrepancy was associated with poorer relationship satisfaction and stability and more conflict. Another study observing 151 long term couples found that stronger demand withdrawal patterns during sexual conflict were tied to lower sexual and relationship satisfaction, greater sexual distress, and lower relationship satisfaction a year later. So, if your wife or your husband rarely initiates, barely touches you, or says they don't love you but they love you but they don't desire you, you're hearing all this kind of stuff, I want to show you how rejection can turn into a cycle that makes you less desirable, and how to recover your sex appeal without turning your partner into a project. So let's unpack what we call the rejection pressure cycle, right? And that's triggered by rejection, and that usually leads to let's put it out there real quick, because this is what we're about to unpack today. That leads to measuring, okay, and that leads into proving, and that leads into pressuring. Let's take patience here, right? That leads into proving, and this is the crazy cycle you're probably stuck in right now. This leads into pressuring. These are not necessarily your intentions, but this is effectively what's going on. Excuse me. And this usually leads into resenting. Okay. Resenting. And this leads into even more rejection. All right. This is what we need to unpack today. All right. So if you're just coming in, hit the like button, share, subscribe, turn up your notifications. Before we dive into unpacking that cycle, if your marriage is actively in a crisis state right now, your wife has lost attraction, intimacy has disappeared, and you feel like roommates, divorce is being discussed, or you're terrified that sexual rejection means your marriage is ending, and you cannot afford to wait for this breakdown to figure out piece by piece, you can simply go to getmymarriageback.com right now. That's getmymarriageback.com/discovery and book a one-on-one discovery session with me so we can map out your exact scenario privately. All right. So rejection hurts. That's the reality. But rejection is not what destroys your personal power. What you do because you feel rejected is where the cycle actually starts. So again, like I said, this is triggered. Okay, this conversation today is triggered by the rejection that you are probably feeling right now, right? And I want to share a couple of traps that you want to avoid with you. There's about 5 traps that I'm going to identify for you. Let me jot that out right now. Trap. Let's see. Let's do this together, guys. Let's do this. Normally I get this repaired, but we can do it together, right? So we're gonna have trap 1, we're gonna have trap 2. All right, we're gonna have trap 3, trap 4, and these are the traps that you are getting stuck in, and we're going to identify them together so you can avoid them. Okay. Let's see. Let's go. There you go. Okay, perfect. And we're going to get this here, and we're going to have trap number 5. Okay. All right, so there you have it. Let's see. So trap number 1, right, is turning intimacy into a scoreboard. Turning intimacy into a scoreboard. And I know, right? Somebody say, how important do you think sex is in a marriage? Of course, very important, right? But again, the problem comes when you start to keep scores, right? And it's not necessarily your fault that you're keeping scores. It's just that, you know when people say love is not enough, right? But then when you start to look at what love really means, that conversation really starts to fall apart really quickly, because love does not keep record of wrongdoing. But guess what we experience the most when you're feeling rejection? You start keeping record of exactly that, right? And so guess what happens? That obviously backfires, because and guess what happens? This was not your intention. You actually mean well, right? You just want some intimate sessions with your partner, right? So what happened? You start to like, okay, she did not initiate last night, right? She moved away when you touched her, right? She has not kissed you the way you used to. Now you start counting how many days since sex, right? Who initiated the last time? Was that hug fake, or like what was that about, right? You start measuring, right? Does she seem more attracted today? See, when you experience rejection, you start measuring. Just again, it's a natural thing, right? When I say natural thing, it's a natural response to rejection, because rejection breeds obsession, right? So that measuring feels like information, right? It feels like accuracy, but reality is that emotionally you're asking your wife's behavior to tell you whether you're still valuable. That's what's happening, right? And during our own crisis, I had to face a very painful truth. My intentions were not to be needy, right? But that's what she was experiencing, right? In fact, I don't expect you to admit that you're being needy, because again, that's not your intentions. Most other people probably don't see you that way, so there's no other way for you to see that way. So it's even anytime she suggests that she just wants some time apart, it shocks you, because you're like, what, are you crazy? Like, we're married, right? So that experience that she's feeling, however, that's what really matters, right? Than the story you are telling yourself. And it doesn't mean you can't, because this issue needs to be fixed. I'm just trying to tell you the baseline here, right? Your feelings, your emotions are one thing. The other experience that has been had, even despite your intentions to just want intimacy from your husband or your wife, is another thing. And you need to know the difference between the two, okay? If you don't understand the difference between the two, you will struggle. So now you go from measuring, now you need to prove, right? So you're trying to buy desire with your proof. So trap number 2 is trying to buy desire as opposed to earning it, right? Trying to buy desire. Now, how's this working out right now? Probably not so good, right? Hello, 911 tip M. That's probably not so good, right? You're trying to buy desire. You're trying to, maybe there's another word for buy. You're trying to, actually, okay, I don't want to say manipulate desire, because you probably don't intend to manipulate, right? Well, you're trying to force desire. That's it. Okay. Again, that's not your intentions, but that's, maybe talk. You're trying to talk your partner into desire. That's more like it, right? So what does this look like, right? So we're measuring, right? This is the path, right? So now you start to prove. The talk is supposed to be you presenting your case to why you should, and you might be saying all the quote unquote right things, right? In your eyes, it's right. We're husband and wife. This is how I connect. This is how I relieve my stress. You're doing all this talking, right? And it's not working out, right? So once you look at the situation, like how many intimacy session have you had in the past 1 month, and the numbers are looking bad, meaning the scoreboard is looking bad, right? In fact, we had an example of somebody that was keeping an actual spreadsheet over the last 6 months, right? So again, the intentions are, you just want intimacy, but you're keeping records to do what? To present and say, hey, this is how bad you've done. How do you think that's going to pan out, right? Even if you have some of the most intended partner ever, right? You now present to them how badly they've done in terms of them being able to satisfy you. It probably didn't work out well, right? So what happened? You start auditioning, you become extra helpful, right? This is in your best case scenario, right? You try to do all the right thing, you become extra available, extra agreeable. You start working harder on your body, on your money, on your communication, your chores, right? Chores, yes, the house chores, right? Because you heard somewhere that if you just help her clean a little bit more, because her love language is quality time, you want to spend a little bit more time, right? All these things are good, like they're intended, but the problem is they're being driven by fear, panic, particularly by rejection, right? So what happens is that you start seeking approval, you start seeking validation, and you look less and less desirable at the end of the day. And that's sad, because that what anyone should need is just somebody who can speak the truth and be intentional and all this stuff, right? But then it's working against you, and that has been your experience, right? So you're performing, essentially, you know what, they can tell, they can see through, you're performing growth for a reaction. And that is quite different from actually exuding a personal value. We're going to talk about that. So when your self-development is secretly requiring that your wife needs to reward you with affection, essentially is going to be received as fake. They can see through it. They don't even know what they're seeing, but it's not desirable. Do you understand? And now your improvement has become another form of dependence. And that becomes the problem, right? So you go from proving to now pressurizing. So when I say pressuring, probably more like pressurizing, but it's the same thing. We're saying the same thing, right? You start pressurizing, and that turns into trap number 3. You're turning sexual pain into repeated relationship conversations, okay? You're turning your let's just call it sexual pain into conversations. But wait, we're supposed to talk about this kind of things. What's wrong with talking about this kind of things? I get you, okay? I completely get you. It's never really me saying that you shouldn't fight for your marriage, however way, no, actually it's the way that you do it that matters, okay? So the point here is that don't just do it however way, because losers always lose, not because they have bad intentions, not because they are bad people, because they don't know what they're doing. That's what it comes down to. It's a matter of skills. It's because if it was as good as everybody should be a good person, most people, they mean well, they try to do the right thing, despite the heart of a man desperately wicked. It's probably because of the manipulative part of the human nature, but yeah, turning your sexual pain into conversations, that would probably be good intentions. That's coming from a place of good intentions, right? But the impact, as usual, is what we're looking at in this lesson, right? So again, remember, you're now proving that that you're proving that you're doing better and you deserve, right? But just because you think you deserve, the stories you're telling yourself does not mean you deserve, right? But what happens is that you start to have conversations like, why don't you ever initiate? Ever? What do you mean ever? Ever? Right? Are you attracted to me? Like, God forbid there's been some kind of affair, or somebody, or a looky-loo on the sidelines, maybe some kind of emotional tampon on the other person's WhatsApp messages. You start to wonder if they are attracted to other people, right? Your mind starts to do all kind of gymnastics, mind masturbation, and mind effing, right? So you start having all this conversation over and over again because you feel rejected, right? The conversations are reactive. They're never proactive in nature. So the other person receives it exactly as such, right? So those questions can sound reasonable, yes, because you're just trying to have a conversation, right? You want to talk her brain off, right, into having sex with you, and it's not happening. It's actually getting worse. Or even when it happens, you feel worse than when you came into it, because you just can tell that they're not really into it, right? And because ideally you would want somebody who voluntarily desires you. They just want you just because, not because you talk them into it. So you start having all this conversation, and that usually turns into emotional conflict, even if it's not physical, because they battle with the idea of not desiring you, not choosing to be with you, and that creates a conflict between that and even the commitment to marriage in the first place. Because ideally, if you're married to a person, it's supposed to be a duty, right? In fact, you've heard some preaching talked about dutiful sex, right, as opposed to beautiful sex. Have dutiful sex occasionally. Well, here's the issue: if every time you get intimate with your partner is all dutiful, somebody's going to resent that. If it's every time is beautiful, then that's beautiful. But is it realistic to be every time beautiful? No, that's not realistic either, right? It's some kind of balance you're trying to strike, and that balance is not stricken with numbers, with how many times, or you keeping count and keeping scores. Because that is going to turn into a conversation, which is now the third trap. Okay, so what happens? You start resenting. The resentment starts, right? Okay, and then you start asking for fairness. So trap number four, calling your scorekeeping fairness. Oh God, don't do that. All right, calling your scorekeeping fairness. This word is the danger. This word fairness. In a romantic relationship, it's a problem. All right. Again, not because you don't mean well, because what do you mean by fairness? Right? What do you mean by fairness? Like, how do you weigh what is fair? Right? Fair means it's equal on this side as much as it's equal on that side. Right? In fact, I don't want to compare this to money, but when it comes to measuring value, right? Value, particularly in the eyes of the beholder, kind of like similar to what you might say market value as opposed to moral values, right? Moral value says, hey, I've got morals, right? I don't cheat, I don't steal, I don't lie, and I don't kill, right? So if I do those four things, I'm upright in the eyes of God. I'm going to make heaven, right? Okay, so there's a difference between making heaven and actually being able to successfully seduce your partner into voluntarily wanting to, desire, have sex or intimacy with you, right? It's two different things, right? Because at the end of the day, the other person is a human being, and their threshold to how they handle emotional issues, rejection, how they handle feeling valid, feeling significant, how they handle connection between the two of you would tend to vary greatly. Meaning, just a little bit can satisfy you. They need a lot more. If you were measuring it apples for apples, oranges for oranges, right? So the problem is that apples are not oranges, and everybody can get satisfaction without necessarily. So the alignment is what creates intimacy, right? But now you find yourself in a funk where it's not aligned. So you try to force it based off of where you guys were yesterday or where you were when you got married about 5 years ago. And that always backfires because clearly you're not learning anything new. There's no newness. There's no novelty. It's boring. It's repetition. It's routine. Okay, I'm giving away some answers already. But the point here is you start resenting because you are keeping scores, right? Because you've been keeping scores. And naturally so, it's not your fault that you're keeping scores because your need is your need. You have your own needs too. A man has got needs, right? So you start keeping scores, and before you know it, those scores become, you start looking for fairness, right? You start thinking, I provide, I try, I do my best, I initiate, I care, right? I care about you, I do my part. And why don't you just play your role, right? Why am I getting nothing back? All right, now rejection becomes a courtroom, right? Every affectionate thing you do creates an invisible debt that your wife never agreed to repay. Well, it might seem like she agreed to pay, but she's not capable. At least we know that she's not capable of paying that back. And it could be vice versa. It could be the man as well, right? So in the Get My Marriage Back framework, right, we warn against attachment, turning attachment into expectations, right, which turns into communication about fairness, which translates to nagging, which eventually damages attraction. Remember that when somebody calls you nagging, they don't, like, it's not, the expectation here is that you have to agree. The point is that they're receiving you as you are nagging, right? So you arguing that I don't nag. It's the same thing as a man being called insecure and say, I'm not insecure. Like, what do you mean you're not insecure? Can you explain? Can you break it down? Well, you start explaining, you're going to complain in that explanation. You're going to get defensive. You're going to literally come off as even more nagging. That's interesting. Oh, wow. So what do? You just shut up? No. That's not what I'm asking you to do. I'm going to tell you what to do. Okay, I'm going to tell you what to do because there's a better way. Okay, the better way, right? But all of this basically results in resentment, right? And that resentment will leak through your tone, how you talk, your withdrawal, your sarcasm, which is poisonous. It's poisonous to attraction. Your frustration. Blue balls is not anybody's mate, but it will show in how you talk. It will also show in your on and off coldness because you're cranky. And even sometimes people at your job, they can feel that you're cranky. Again, not your fault. A man or a woman has got needs, right? So all of this to protect yourself short term, but there's ups and downs because you don't have the answer. You don't know what you're doing. All right. And that leads me into trap number 5, right? So resenting goes back into you feeling rejection, which basically feeds the cycle all over again, right? Now, I always like to highlight this. You see this part, the pressuring? This is the pressure point here, literally, right? Once you enter this pressuring mode, right, there's no stopping the cycle. It's going to feed itself over and over again. And the issues get worse until someone decides to get some skills and actually break the cycle. It gets more awkward. It gets more weirder, right? All right. So the problem here is that trap number 5, you becoming emotionally controlled by the very response you want to exchange. Okay. Becoming emotionally controlled. All right, this is the problem here. This is what feeds the cycle again. This is trap number 5. Once you enter this zone, like I said, that's the resentment, and that leads into a feeling of rejection all over again, right? Because now she's experiencing more tension around intimacy. It's awkward. Even if she wants to, because again, this is driven. This is the biggest sex organ right here, the brain, right? So even if she wants to, she resents the idea that she really doesn't. It wasn't her decision, and that turns out she doesn't want to, right? And if she doesn't want, she doesn't want. And guess what? You receive that as she's weaponizing it against you because it's your rightful right. How dare she, right? So you experience her distance as more rejection, and the cycle begins all over again. And this is how a man can desperately want attraction back while becoming increasingly dependent on signs of attraction to regulate himself, emotionally controlled by the scoreboard that he's keeping. And eventually that's going to spread out into other areas of your life, of your marriage, because again, it feels like pressure, it feels like, and it's going to spread because intimacy is everything. It's actually one of the like we have something that we share here all the time. Let's see here, let me see if I can pull it up real quick. In terms of the 4 focal points, okay, this is the 4 focal points here: friendship, sex, expectations, and your pride and ego. These are the things you want to try to understand. These are the 4 focal points. If you understand this, your marriage is safe. If you don't get this right, everything tends to fall apart. Shout out to Gabi Oku Chaba. Hello. All right, so now your marriage feels like your roommate, and this is why you're probably getting trapped by your own scorekeeping, and it's not your fault. You just naturally what you do when you feel like this is your right anyway. But if you don't know what you're doing, then it turns out to become, in fact, the same thing happened in my own story, right? The deeper shift came when I stopped organizing my entire emotional state around whether she reciprocates or not. Okay, because again, once you do that, it becomes that then you're under control of another person's behavior, ups and downs and stuff like that. And naturally, it's supposed to be that. This is what people mean by you can't count on other people for happiness. I push against that to an extent, because at the end of the day, you are under the influence of your surroundings. But if you're going to be a winner in this life, you're going to have to not worry so much about that. Worry about the things you can control. And that's always going to be my angle. It's about empowering you. I went through the exact same thing. Either you're talking intimacy or you're talking about, because once you've been married and you've been married for a while and you're seeing each other every day, you start taking each other for granted. It happens on all ends. It might look different on all ends. On the different both sides, it might look different. The other person might feel like, oh, I just feel numb. The other person might feel like, I don't feel wanted. It might be vice versa, and it can flip back and forth. It depends on your particular dynamic. Everybody's story is essentially different. So check this out, right? What I'm teaching right now is just the universal roadmap that most people fall under, but every marriage has its own story, has its own curveballs, landmines that's going to inevitably come, right? So your wife not wanting sex, not initiating affection, or saying she's no longer attracted to you, or she's not really in love with you, all those stuff, may not actually be the core issue. In fact, they're almost never the core issue. Okay, so underneath that symptom is probably years of pressure. When it comes to any kind of bone of contention, you don't know how to communicate in a way that actually seduces your partner. It might be resentment from other issues that has nothing to do with you. Some people are bringing childhood trauma into their marriage as well, right? Excessive predictability. Maybe you're just naturally boring, but there's something about you that created the marriage in the first place. So it's not a final verdict, right? It's just probably a phase, right? But that phase, yes, is good enough to destroy your marriage. It might be a betrayal, it might be emotional instability, it might be conflict, disconnection, it might be just, or some kind of pattern that you have not correctly identified yet. If you want me to look directly at your specific relationship blocks, just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery, and the link is also pinned into the description, and it will be pinned to the comment after the taping. All right, so now you can secure a discovery slot available this week, and then we can talk about it. Now, some of you are realizing that sexual rejection isn't actually the issue, okay? Probably for the first time, but that's probably what you focused on, right? Remember the scoreboard, the spreadsheets, right? The issue is identifying the actual pattern destroying attraction in the marriage, and that's exactly what we do in the discovery session. So just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. Now let's talk. Let's see if we can fix some of these issues before we round up today, right? If you cannot demand desire, right, and you can't negotiate attraction, I think that was the word I was looking for earlier on when I said buy or talk, like you're trying to negotiate, right? Or you can't use your wife's affection as proof that you're valuable, right? If you can't use those things, now what does rebuilding attraction actually require from you? The answer is not pretending rejection does not hurt. The reality is that rejection hurts all the time. Okay. The answer is building enough capacity that rejection no longer decides who you become next. And when you start that way, because again, rejection is inevitable, right? In any relationship, meaning there's going to be moments that is just funky. Some people call it the dry spell, right? It's funky, and it's not necessarily always your fault. It's not because you're smelly. It's not because you didn't wash your boxers yesterday. It's not always that. Sometimes it's that. You should clean up after yourself, by the way, right? So you have this option, right? We have all this option here where, you start, you have this option. Let's see, how do I do this? Okay, let's do it like this, right? You have the option of going cuckoo wild, negative, right? You start measuring how many times, we don't want to go this route, okay? Because this route right here is driven by fear. It's easy. It's for losers, right? Well, just because you fail one time doesn't mean you always fail. Just something to avoid, right? So instead of going that route, we're going to go a different route this time. Anytime you feel rejection, right, we're going to go to grounding. This is very important. I'm going to share something we'll call the GPS, the 3 core pillars with you, okay? GPS. This is the 3 core pillars. All right, and this is a major part of what we teach and what guides our framework, okay? So you want to go towards grounding because again, rejection will happen, right? And the idea here is to build enough capacity that you're able to flip the pain of rejection into attraction. Okay, we want to be able to flip the pain of rejection because everybody hates rejection. I do. I still do. Okay, I don't like when I'm being rejected. I just know what to do with that. And I also know it to get more rejection because that's how you build muscles. That's how you build greatness in life. It's about getting more no's, right? But I get it. You don't want, the last thing you want to get is get more no's from your wife. It doesn't always come in the form of sexual no, right? But again, these are opportunities to build trust. Let me put this out there so you can understand this. This is opportunity to build right, to build trust, safety. If they feel safe around you, they want to have sex with you. Simple. Keep it simple, right? And security. If they feel safe and secure around you, she wants, that's it. That's the bottom line, okay? And remember that her not feeling safe around you is not always, it's not absolutely your fault. You're there to help, okay? You're there to become an environment she can run to, okay? And I know I'm saying she could be the other way around too, but let's just focus here, right? So GPS. So we have grounding, right? And we're not going to pretend that rejection does not hurt. That's the point I'm making right now. The answer is building enough capacity, right? So we go from rejection to grounding. That's the choice you want to make. So your wife can turn away tonight, right? She turns her back towards you. And the idea is that you don't want to turn that moment into a verdict, okay? You don't want to turn that moment into a verdict about your masculinity, meaning please don't stop begging, okay? Right? You don't want to turn it to a verdict about your marriage because it shows up as fear and panic. It shows up as lack of confidence, and confidence is always sexy. So that means lack of confidence is always diminish. It destroys your desirability, right? So you don't want to turn it to a verdict about the future of your romance with your wife. It could just, that's just that moment. It's temporary, right? And how you treat that moment is everything. And the only reason why you're not going to treat that moment as an opportunity to keep scores is, especially if it's been happening for a little bit, is grounding. So grounding will bring you back from panic to gratitude, meaning there's a reason why that person is your partner right now. Why don't you spend some more time appreciating why they are your partner? In the final analysis, in the grand scheme of things, there's a reason why they're here, right? And those reasons is not just all, like, it's never really negative. There's something about that person that brought you back together, right? And if you celebrate more of those, you're probably going to get more of that, right? So that's what we mean by gratitude. So the G stands for the G also stands for gratitude. I'm going to put gratitude under here, right? It's just a sense of gratitude. Gratitude is one of the hardest things for human beings to do. I don't know if you know that. Gratitude is one of the hardest things for human beings to do. It's easier for us to see how everything is going wrong, and we keep scores of all the wrong things more so than we keep scores of what we're enjoying or what we find value in, right? And if you can elevate yourself above the natural and just do what winners do, winners are the minority usually, then you might see a different, you definitely will see a different difference. Okay, all right, good. So we have grounding right now. So grounding will return you from panic, will move you, gravitate you away from panic to gratitude. Sometimes you might need your faith. These are the things you can tap into, help you create emotional stability. And then the next choice, now you're able to control. And we can now go from grounding into the second core pillar in our framework, which is purpose. Okay, we're going to go into purpose. All right, so purpose is, you can't really build purpose without pain. A lot of people, pain is a necessary ingredient here, right? And I'll tell you even more so. We're going to need, so remember, pain, rejection comes with pain. Right? Rejection comes with pain, right? When you bring that together with grounding, you're able to flip that pain into a purpose. We're going somewhere. Stick with me here. But what do I mean by purpose, right? Because I know that can sound vague and it sounds so disconnected from what you want, which is attraction. You want to be desired by your partner, right? See, once rejection stops taking over every hour of your day, obsession, rejection breeds obsession, right? Your life gets bigger again, right? When I say your life, I'm talking about the reason why you're here, like your life mission, your life work, your life purpose. And you can probably it's probably easier for you to tap into that by looking at, maybe, let's say you're a father, you have children, you have creativity, you have some people, believe it or not, it's like, it's just meditation, right? Just being able to go back into your center, your spirituality, right? Just a higher sense of self, but more so now the impact, being intentional about the impact you want to leave on your surroundings, on the people around you in your area. That no longer depends on how they respond to you in real time. Now you're intentionally just pouring, because remember, it's grounded, right? You actually have a source, because grounding means you're actually going back to your source, your higher self, right? So it's very important to understand this, because you have to take the time to understand this, because it's not easy, right? Remember, the easy path is the loser's path. This is where you're just going with your feelings and you feel rejected, so you're just going to act accordingly, and it just gets worse and worse. Now you're moving in purpose. Okay, in fact, we had a client who slowly but surely, this is exactly to his words, like surely he had made the partner the primary source of companionship, attention, safety, and validation. That's a lot to put on one human being. Okay, now you can get those things from your partner, but you really have to be careful with making them your primary source, because if you make them the primary source, you're going to drain them. It's just going to show in your behavior, in the way you show up. It's going to show as needy, as clingy. And it's natural to go in that direction when you feel rejected. The first thing you want to do is start begging and proving and apologizing and then complaining and then explaining and then getting defensive. And when you have defensiveness, you're one-fourth the journey into divorce, because defensiveness leads to criticism, right? That leads into eventually the other person feels so pressured they shut down, still walling, right? So now you have 3 out of 4. The only thing you have left is contempt. Well, throughout those 3, contempt has been happening, because it's now me against you. Why do people keep scoreboards? That's me against you, as opposed to me and you against the world. If that's the energy driving your relationship or your attitude about sex or rejection around sex, it's just going to get worse. So from purpose, we can move in the direction of self-discovery. Okay, well, if you're able to navigate your way from rejection to grounding and purpose, you're going to discover so much more about yourself. Particularly, hold on one second, I don't like using right here. Particularly, this is a good thing, right? Particularly when it comes to your capacity, you start realizing that you have a lot more than you realize. Okay, so this is the 3rd core pillar, GPS, self-discovery. You discover your strength. That's another S. Okay, so we have strength, right, as opposed to moving from a place of weakness, right? We have sustainability. This is your source of sustainability. All right, everything else is not sustainable. Counting on the other person to be able to carry you all the time is not sustainable. You're going to come off as needy. Okay, so self-discovery. Okay, you start discovering so much more about yourself. How is this possible? Because you can now reference back to the pain. The experience of the pain of rejection is exactly how you're going to know that you have so much more in you. That frame of reference is key in all of this. I hope that's making sense. If making sense, let me know. Okay, all right, so self-discovery. Now you can look at yourself without self-blame, right? Because guilt is also just as poisonous, right? And you can say, where did rejection make you feel insecure, as opposed to why did you get rejected? Why did that person reject you? Why did the subject reject you? It's different from where did rejection make you feel insecure? Because now, as a winner, you now know that rejection is inevitable in life. So it's not a big deal if you get a little bit of rejection. I said a little bit. Well, it was a lot bit, right? If you get rejection, it's not a big deal. You see them as an opportunity to win, to build trust, to build safety, to build security, right? So where did you start? How and why did you start comparing yourself to other men, right? What is it about you that's so insecure you felt the need to compare yourself to another person when you're already the winner in the story, right? And you start basically, you stop using your, like, basically flipping your dignity for emotional reaction. Okay, so you ask more questions that has to do with your capacity rather than how you are the victim, right? Remember the fairness thing. So again, you're not the victim in your romantic relationship if all we're talking about is emotional, right? It is your responsibility to learn how you're able to influence, to learn your influence capabilities when it comes to your partner, to learn how to seduce your partner. That becomes your responsibility. Okay, so self-discovery means finding your capacity, finding your strength, and not prosecuting yourself or your partner. So now self-discovery, when you start discovering that shows up, it will show in your behavior. It will show up as value. Okay, it will show up as value. Now, this part, they can't avoid it, right? This is the part where they don't choose to like you or not. They naturally, when you start showing up value does not mean moral values. We're talking about experiential value now. Okay, we're no longer talking about moral values. You're supposed to do the right thing. Don't cheat, don't steal, don't lie, don't kill. Okay, you're supposed to do those things. Every human being is supposed to do those things. That doesn't mean you deserve affection or sex. It doesn't mean that. Okay, in fact, if you if you have an over bloated sense of self in that manner, you think you're special, you might just actually push against that, because usually that means you're not spending enough time looking for a way that you can give value. This is now you giving value. First of all, you recognize that you're building value, you're building capacity, you're giving it. Not only just you recognize the value, other people can see it. Naturally, she will see that changes. Okay. And because you're changing right in front of her eyes, she's confused. She doesn't know what she's looking at. What happens? Let me show you what happens. Okay. Now, curiosity and attraction happens. Let me put some space here. Curiosity and attraction happens. Okay. Naturally, she starts to become curious. Because, first of all, you're not announcing it. Okay. It's just, you're not announcing this. This is just naturally happening when you spend a little bit more time building your own value. Okay, a little bit more time is all you need. Okay, you're being intentional. Now she's curious. Now curiosity, when she starts to wonder about you, that's automatically being attracted to you. Okay, the warmth that you're receiving is a function of you not pressurizing the other person. Now they get to choose to come towards you, not just because you know what you're doing right now. You spend all your time building yourself rather than trying to manipulate or talk the other person or negotiate desire. Desire is now naturally happening. Okay, and then one night something happened, has nothing to do with you. Maybe it had a lot to do with you. You're not perfect after all, because again, when she starts getting drawn towards you right now, she's not drawn to you because you're perfect. That's not the idea here, right? In fact, she probably resents the idea that you're perfect. She wants you to be yourself, but she also wants to be attracted to that from a place of curiosity, mystery, and anything that looks like newness, novelty. She's just drawn to you. She doesn't even know why. She's just attracted to you. That is attraction. That's desire. Okay, it's not something that you can put on logically. It's just supposed to be dutiful. That's the problem. That's boring. Okay, so now let's say something happens one night and she pulls away, right? You know exactly what to do. The more you're able to navigate this track successfully over and over again, this cycle, the more you're able to navigate from another rejection. Okay, because this can happen. This is real life. If you're able to navigate this cycle over and over, the more you do that, the more you build trust, safety, and security, right? So eventually it becomes second nature. And then the losers will say you're lucky. All right, the losers will turn around and say, you just happen to be lucky. Well, after all, the real is a process. You didn't get here overnight. You didn't act based on your emotional reactions, right? Well, you didn't respond to emotional reactions with panic, with measuring, keeping scoreboards. The only scoreboard you keep is you becoming a better version of yourself. Yeah, right back to simple, right? But is it simple? No. Let me tell you something. Before we wrap up, I need to share this with you, right? Let me leave you with this. I'm going to leave you with this. Very, very important. This is key to everything we've been talking about. Okay? You might be thinking I'm describing your marriage. Yes, I am. Okay? So don't go back to guessing, because everybody's story is different. Knowing this rejection pressure cycle and navigating the attraction, what I just shared with you is called the attraction recovery cycle. Knowing this and knowing this is half, a little bit less than half the battle won. Okay, why? Because it's easier said than done. Okay, for an average person, skills. Okay, skills is something you've done over and over again. Remember, this is cycles, right? So skills, support, and system go a long way when it comes to success. So every marriage is different. Every relationship has their own history, personalities, and blind spot. And this needs to be tailored to your specific story. Your wife not initiating sex or affection can be it's what you're seeing. Yes, that's what you're observing. But the actual destructive pattern underneath, is probably so many other things that we can't possibly talk about here, right? So that needs to be unpacked, right? It could look okay on the surface. It might look like betrayal, resentment, insecurity, emotional disconnection, something completely it varies, but again, how it shows up in everybody's story is different. And that's why I offer a private 1-hour discovery session. We'll spend 1 hour looking at your specific story, your situation, identifying what's actually happening in your marriage, in your relationship, more importantly, in your relationship, and then help you gain clarity on the next best step. So if you're ready for that, you simply go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. That's getmymarriageback.com/discovery. The link is also in the description and will be pinned to the comment. All right. So I want to leave you with this, right? Your wife's rejection is information. Okay. It's not a measurement of your worth. Okay. Rebuilding attraction does not mean convincing your wife to desire you. You have to be careful with your idea of communication, particularly with respect to your words, right? It means taking responsibility. If you want to rebuild attraction, it means taking it usually, okay? It means you have to take responsibility for the experience, the identity, emotional stability, the value that belong to you, how you show up. Wanting sex and affection from your wife it's not begging. It can translate, it can look like that on the other side, right? The fear-driven pressure begins when it really starts off when you start measuring, like I pointed out to you earlier on. And it's kind of hard it's an oxymoron to ask you not to measure, right? Because, if it's been happening how do you know it's happening if you're not measuring? Well, that's where it gets tricky, okay? And that's why I think you need the skill, you need the support, you need a system to follow, all right? Because the reality is that you're still not going to produce affection by keeping that schedule obsessively, even though rejection breeds obsession. And when rejection shows up again, if you're able to navigate this and you gain the skills and the clarity you need, then you know exactly what to do. And you recognize them as opportunities. And even if you find yourself in inevitable ever again, you see them as opportunities, and eventually you might even build boredom in another angle. Then you know exactly what to do. Okay? So if this helped you understand why your marriage might be in a funky place, you're living like roommates at this point, hit this like button, share, subscribe to this channel so you're notified whenever we go live. And if you're looking for me, you know where to find me. Just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. Hopefully you've been enlightened, educated. We'll see you on the next one. Take care. God bless. Peace.
Are you fighting to save a marriage or a relationship, or simply avoiding to end up in a broken or toxic one?
We've been there, and you're in the right place. You see, inside this book, right, you will find and you will discover the secret to save a broken marriage, and you will learn how to build and attract the marriage of your dream.